for joining us today for our December ASHPR webinar. Today we have a special guest presenter, attorney Julieanne Steinbacher from Pennsylvania, who is going to be talking about a dementia-focused practice. We're super excited to have her presenting for us today. And just to introduce myself, my name is Amber Hines. I'm the owner of ASHPR. We specialize in Medicaid compliant annuities and help elder law and estate planning attorneys really focus their practice on Medicaid SPIAs as well as other hybrid long-term care insurance policies. So with that, Julieanne, I'll go ahead and hand things over to you.
Thanks, Amber. It's really great to be here with everybody. And I think this is a perfect time for people to be thinking about the dementia-focused practice. From my perspective, it's something that we have done at my office for the last 10 years. And it comes from the idea that, as people come to my office, I, like many people, were more like a crisis Medicaid attorney. Somebody would come in and we do planning, and we kind of wait for the crisis to happen. And we just thought, we could do more for people. And so somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, what can we do today to prevent that crisis? And so I'm going to talk to you about that today. I am an attorney. I have 7 offices across Pennsylvania locations with Steinbacher, Goodall, and Geriatric. And so I'm a practicing attorney. I'm also a coach. I coach elder law and estate planning attorneys across the nation on having the lives and practices that they want. And if that wasn't enough, I also own a personal care home locally where I live. It's actually the hardest business that I own. But this, what we're talking about is something that I've authored books about. I was a TEDx speaker about. It's something really, really important to me. So I'm glad to have the time to share with you what we do at our office for a dementia-focused practice. Just point out to everybody, I also have a, what I always say, a passion project going on right now. It's called the Hey Woman podcast. My daughter and I do that together, and it's real conversations on caregiving, legacy, and love. It's really a salute to my mom, who passed away last December. But we do the Hey Woman podcast, and we are very actively pushing out referrals to attorneys across the nation. We push out to a website called planningandprotecting.com. So if I reach out to you and say, hey, I have a referral, it's because of this passion project that's really going on at this point in time. Always looking for attorneys in different locations. The other day, I was just looking for an attorney in Spokane, Washington. So if you're there, let me know. So why am I so passionate about this? This is actually a picture of my kids and my mom and 2 nieces. And, I just, for me, that, I'm more than my job. And, I started out as a social worker with a bachelor's degree in gerontology, and then, became an attorney and have focused on this. But through my career and my life, I've played these roles. My father-in-law had dementia, multi-infarct dementia. And the reality of it is, in this country, this is hard. This is hard stuff. We're caregiving for people for years. We often don't know how to caregive. It was hard for me, and I feel like I know about the Aging Network. And my goal is really to help families across the country navigate this difficult journey easier. So today we're going to talk about the different types of dementia. We're going to talk a little bit about and why that's important for us to know as attorneys, the cost of dementia care, dementia planning in kind of the middle of Medicaid planning, but then also dementia planning knowing that it's not Medicaid planning, it's much more than that. My average client who comes to me with a diagnosis of dementia that we help may or may not be doing Medicaid planning. Certainly many of them are, but some of them are really not. And then thinking about having a dementia care planner in your firm or outsourcing part of that, and really understanding, the third question, which is, how does this all fit together? So these are just the facts and figures from the Alzheimer's Association. And I think, not to like bore you with statistics, but I think this is really important because when we think about dementia, the reason that it's a little bit more different from a business standpoint is, first of all, people get a diagnosis and we have time to plan. That means we could do gifts, transfers. People are very, very likely to need some sort of care. We're very likely to need to use, do some protections with spouses, maybe do some annuity work, because it's such a long journey and it's difficult. Many people will say, what happens when we get sick? Our families don't take care of you. That's not true. 70% of the care in this country is by family caregivers. And what we want to do is be able to help them sooner versus later. We don't want to wait until that spouse gets sick themselves and all of a sudden they're in a hospital and now this person has to go into a nursing home. We want to think about what can we do earlier. But the statistics are staggering about just the risk, 1 in 5 for women if you're age 45, 1 in 10 for men. And why is that? And the costs. So there's no doubt that this is a real issue in our country that's not being dealt with by healthcare. It's not being dealt with by primary care physicians. I'm actually on a task force in Pennsylvania just to try to get better diagnoses, which are so important. So first of all, the diagnosis, as I said, the diagnosis is so important. So sometimes people come in and they say they have an Alzheimer's diagnosis and they got that just from their primary care physician. So just so you know, 80% of all diagnoses are made by primary care physicians, 50% of whom, the primary care physicians themselves, would say they don't feel comfortable making that diagnosis. We want to know what type of a dementia people have. So Alzheimer's is just a type of dementia. We're going to see typically kind of like just a slide down. So if I get Alzheimer's and I'm just going to see this steady decline. Although I will tell you in other countries, they see something very different. But in the US, that's really what we're kind of seeing. But what if we get something else? What if we get vascular dementia or multi-infarct dementia? We're going to see it's kind of stair steps. We're going to see it go and then we get bad and then we go, then we get bad. So it's very different for us. Other things like frontotemporal dementia, that's important. We're often going to have a lot more, it's going to happen to somebody who's younger. We're going to have a lot more behaviors or expressions because our frontotemporal lobe is our part of our brain that deals with our filter. The part that gets a little messed up if people drink a little bit too much. So it's just imagine that dementia looks different, feels different. This stuff is really important based on what medicines work for those different diagnoses. It's also really important for the family to know, like if their loved one has frontotemporal dementia, we're more likely to have behaviors that we would call them in this country, expressions that they would call them in Norway. But we need to deal with that and we need to know that. And that could be important for how we are caring for somebody. Lewy body dementia, again, something that we often have a lot more hallucinations, a lot more muscle rigidity. Lewy body dementia is what Casey Kasem had, and also what Robin Williams had. And we have a good thanks to a lot of the famous people who have come out. Bruce Willis, Nancy Reagan, about Ronald Reagan. It's really helped move this forward. As we also talked about vascular dementia, that is more caused by some issues with our heart. But it really looks different than, it's also called multi-infarct dementia, very much looks different than Alzheimer's. Additionally, in my situation, my father-in-law had multi-infarct dementia, and he was prescribed drugs for Alzheimer's disease. They don't work. There's no reason for it, right? But we do know the cost of care, $384 billion annually. And for each person, the lifetime cost is $405,000. So if we take the statistics we already looked at, 1 in 5 chance that a woman's going to need this, a woman age 45 is going to have some sort of dementia, and these type of out-of-pocket costs. So what are we doing? Now, it's really, really important for us to know that 70% of that is done by family caregivers, unpaid caregiving. One of the biggest changes that I've had in my career at my office is we use caregiver agreements all the time, not because we're worried about Medicaid, but because we are really worried about making sure that we are able to pay family caregivers. So if we have a child who's caring for her own children and she's working, the statistics will tell us like she might get a demotion. She might be written up for the first time. Why? Because she's exhausted. So maybe she should stop working a little bit and we should pay her. So I know that that's historically been a taboo thing, paying family, but right now most of the care is being done by family members, and the statistics would tell us that the stress is really affecting them. So nearly 12 million caregivers provide more than 19 billion hours of care annually. And that's just increasing. But in most of the care, even though the costs, we think about the cost of nursing home, in-home care, most of the cost is by unpaid caregivers. And so we really want to know that, and we really want to be thinking about what is the plan? How do we work with that? And so one of the things I do with families, I really kind of talk about that. I talk about, could somebody quit their job? Is that what we want? In fact, at my office, we do a caregiver's trust, which is a trust early on before anybody's even really sick, that says, hey, this is what we'd want. We want, if our local daughter cares for us, we want her to get paid while her sibling sits in, sunny Florida. I'm in North Central Pennsylvania and doesn't do as much. And so we want to really be thinking about that. So I do see a question in the chat, and I'm just going to take it right now at the end for questions, but I appreciate the question in the chat. So the question is, if I have right now, if I do a caregiver agreement, how do we deal with the tax ramifications of that? It's a state question. So first of all, it is taxable. So it's either a gift or taxable, and we don't really want it to be a gift, right? Because then we have a Medicaid problem, unless we're in a situation where that doesn't matter. But the caregiver agreement by itself is an agreement that is providing care. The next question you have to ask is this subject, is it employment wages, or is this, an independent contractor agreement? And there's pros and cons both ways. Obviously, if I make the person an employee, I have, the liability, payroll taxes. And so we would want, in most situations, we're going to want to use a service to help with that. I also can do an independent contractor agreement, and every state's slightly different, but usually in this situation, we have one family member just doing it for the family, not doing it for everybody else, and really kind of dictating the schedule and how this works. We can use an independent contractor agreement. For those of you who don't feel comfortable with that, I would send it to a CPA and to maybe their CPA that they're working for, or if they don't have one, I would develop a relationship with them so they can talk about those ramifications. Because certainly too, if I'm an independent contractor, I couldn't get unemployment because now I have kind of a business. There's just huge ramifications to that. And so we would want to deal with those issues, absolutely. Now I have some statistics here, and this is really just specific to Pennsylvania, but any of you can get on the Alzheimer's Association website and they'll have these exact specifics for your state. And what it's kind of talking about here is the caregivers that we're often are doing the caregivers. So 1 in 4 caregivers in Pennsylvania is providing care to somebody who has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. Often they're female, but not 100%. 35% are male. My husband was the primary caregiver for his dad. Many are also caring for a child. And many times they're not in good health themselves. And so this is just adding more stress onto a situation that's a little bit more difficult. I also think it's important that, you know, if you look at the chart, the dark purple, on the right-hand side, as far as age, 31% of them are over 65 themselves. So we have people who maybe have kids that were a little younger, but then we also have people who are 65 and already have their own issues, diagnoses, and now they're caring for their spouse or their parents who, you know, are 85 or 90. And so I think it's important that we understand that the caregivers themselves could already have competing interest or their own medical conditions. So what do people typically do? So what they're typically doing, personal care, household tasks. One of the things that isn't on here also is financial help. And we find that's one of the places that we really help people at our office, because many times the people who are tasked with dealing with the finances have trouble with that. And no surprise to most of you listening, I'm sure they have trouble getting the bank to accept the power of attorney. Right now I'm doing a conservatorship and I can't get a bank to accept a court order, for goodness sakes. And so sometimes it can be difficult, but it's also really important that we understand it's the length of time. So many times they're providing care for over 2 years, so 64% of the time. And 30% of the time they're providing more than 40 hours a week of care. The average is 21.4 hours over 4 years. That's a lot of care. We're not talking about just like it's something that's part-time or fleeting. And that is why we want to give special attention as elder law and estate planning attorneys to either within our own firms develop these types of things or understand the network out there to be able to get people to the right referrals. And some of that will depend on whether or not your office is more rural or urban, whether or not you have aging life professionals, how robust the Alzheimer's Association is, or other types of things that can help with this, even your own healthcare network, you know, what is able to provide. So what happens? So you say, okay, you know, my message to you so far is that this is really important for us to be thinking about. And so what is the role at my office of a dementia planner in my office? So we do certainly help clients with the legal issues that are there. Of course, we're doing wills, powers of attorneys, maybe trusts for Medicaid. Maybe we're using an irrevocable living trust even to use a trustee rather than relying on a power of attorney. Of course, we're dealing with the financial issues. We are absolutely, you know, thinking about, you know, should we do Medicaid planning? Is the person a veteran? Can we get veterans benefits? But, you know, for many people, they don't even know that Medicare is not going to cover for long-term care. And obviously, there's a lot changing in this country with the cuts to Medicaid. But we're also going to talk about, you know, kind of these social implications. So how do we keep people from disengaging? Because we know that social connectedness is one of the most important things. So, you know, should we use a memory cafe? How do we help the caregiver path out? You know, what happens if this person gets sick? What happens if they even get sick? Who's going to do that? And so at our office, that dementia planner works closely with the attorneys to provide a range of services, really counsels the clients on, here's some things that are going to happen upon this journey. We need to get prepared for it. If you're the primary caregiver, what happens if you get sick? You say to us, you're never putting your spouse in a nursing home, and I hear you. But why don't we start looking at facilities? What's the difference between a memory care unit and assisted living or a nursing home? And for some of them, we're going to be giving guidance on long-term care options. Long-term care, what is the difference between those different types of facilities? Also, you know, are there insurances? Are there creative financial products that can be used? But the dementia care plan is for the caregiver. It helps connect clients' families with the right resources and services so that they're able to deal with that.
Julie, we do have a question here about what a memory cafe is.
Yeah, so they're wonderful things that you'll find across the country. And I live in a very rural area, and there are memory cafes. And basically, it's designed for somebody who has a diagnosis of dementia to be able to go there with other people who have a diagnosis and participate in activities and you know, be able to still have that social connectedness. So one of the things that we know is that when people disengage and get isolated, their dementia gets worse. And that's actually what usually happens in this country. They feel uncomfortable, they don't have a safe place to go. And so if you don't know of one in your area, I would Google memory cafe and like wherever you live. I think you'll be amazed that many of you will find that they do exist. There's also dementia-friendly organizations for many people to be using.
We have another question here, Julie, if you have a minute to answer this one. It says, how do you charge for dementia planning in your office other than preparing basic estate planning documents?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And so for us, when we started doing this, a lot of it, we ended up realizing that when we did medical assistance applications for families, we were giving a lot of this information away for free, to be honest with you, because the people at our office who had done medical assistance applications often interacted with the family members, and they would be asked questions. Now, often, you know, that could be a situation where we're already in a crisis. So, so we're already getting in home and community-based waiver services, or we're already at nursing home care. And so what we found was that we just really figured out how much time we were, and we increased our fees in that manner. My office, we do a lot of flat fee billing, and we figure that out by really having all of our staff enter their hours so we know how long an average case takes us. And then what we happened was a typical client that I would see might come in, again, not in that crisis mode, that would be one person, but the typical client that I'm going to see is somebody who just got a diagnosis, or they're not at a nursing home yet, but you know, the spouse or a family member is still trying to care for them, but they're wanting to, you know, update powers of attorney. So often they call my office, they want to update powers of attorneys. When I meet with them, of course, we're going to update the powers of attorneys if we can, and many times we're earlier in the journey. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have them do, you know, all the foundational documents, wills, powers of attorneys, all of those types of things. But we're also going to say to them, we are able to give you a dementia care navigator, you know, access to somebody who's going to help you through this. And we have a caregiver toolkit that you can see that's on planningandprotecting.com, and you can download that for free. And what happens is we start just telling families, you need to start thinking about this. So you need to start thinking about, oh, how are we going to plan the funeral? You need to start thinking about, if the caregiver gets sick, where are we going? And often people have like a temporary answer, like one kid could move in, and then we have a more long-term answer. And we're actively talking to people about, you need to go visit these. At our office, what we have figured out is that we add an additional charge of between $3,000 and $4,000 to do that. And that's not based on just me pulling it out of the air. At my office, if people signed on for that, what would happen is a social worker would go out and from my office, and we also have other facilities, other law practices that would end up using maybe an aging care manager in their local area, doesn't go out and does an assessment. and says, okay, really, where is this person at? Because sometimes what families report to us and the reality of it isn't the same. And then what we do is we do quarterly visits, and some of that can be more telephone assurance because I live in a very rural area. The reality of it is that people just want somebody to call. And I think it's really important. I'm not talking about like my staff going out and visiting the facilities. I'm talking about my staff talking to the family and saying, here's what a memory care unit is, and this is, you know, a licensed personal care home or assisted living. Here's what a nursing home is. I think you should go visit these. They go visit a couple. Then they talk to my staff about where they visited, what it was, and which facility they might want to do. And we might even start doing the application with them, even if they're not ready to go in. We just want to get them into a better place. We're very much advocates that people should be using Medicare more. So getting them palliative care, which is a Medicare benefit, getting them hospice care when they can do it. They're fantastic benefits, both financially for our clients, but also just to deal with all of this. And so that's another thing that we would start talking to them about. And just, you know, it takes some advocating. Sometimes we think somebody should they have recurrent hospitalizations. We look at the rules and we think, oh, that person could get Medicare, and we make a referral, and hospice or palliative care says no. And so we have to advocate a little bit about that. So, you know, so at our office, it is definitely, we don't do it independently. I know some offices around the country that will do it independently. But at my office, if you came to me and let's say you were 65 and your husband just got a diagnosis of dementia, I would be offering you wills, powers of attorneys, whatever I'm going to do, depending on their asset limit, whether I'm doing Medicaid planning or more empowerment planning with long-term care products. That would be offered to you along with this navigation. And it's really interesting. More people say yes to a combined Medicaid and navigation, or a combined plan with a navigation, than say yes to just the documents or just the Medicaid application. And I think at the end of the day, the reason is because people want somebody to reach out to. They want a trusted advisor. And that's really what we're doing at our office. And again, for many people across the country, as they add this, they found, maybe the attorney doesn't know it, but they found that a lot of the people in their office were already answering some of these questions. They're already being helpful to clients, and we wouldn't want to stop doing that. But we certainly would want to think about, could we do it? And when they're being helpful kind of in a crisis. They're responding to whatever's asked. The difference with this is it's more proactive. Rather than waiting for that question, we're saying, okay, here's the next thing you should think about, and here's the next thing. Some offices are, you know, focus more on financial things, while other offices might focus more on advocating for good care. One of the things our office is doing right now is, if your loved one has a diagnosis, we're starting to talk to people about how we don't want to ever go to an emergency room. So somebody has a diagnosis, they go to the ER. It's one of the worst places for them to be, but they go there because there's behaviors. So how do we stop that from happening? There's many ways we can stop that from happening. One, we can teach families how to, you know, de-escalate things. You know, we can help the caregivers become better caregivers. We also can be working more proactively to make sure they get in with a neuropsychologist or somebody who can provide better medications. So a lot of it is advocating within the system. The first thing I always do is make sure they have a good diagnosis. And if they don't, I really, really tell families it's worth the time to get a better diagnosis. And again, where I live, very rural, I'm often telling people they're going to drive 2 hours to see a neuropsychologist so that they can get a good diagnosis. And I think that's worthwhile. We also, the other trends that we see a lot of trends that if the wife is the person diagnosed, that the husband will pretty easily, and I don't mean any disrespect, this is just my experience, say that I want to do everything for her, but I know I can't care for her. So I have a lot of people who, husband and wife together, will move into a facility where there is different levels of care. So I've seen that repeatedly. And so we talk about, well, let's do that sooner versus later. Let's have a family conversation. Sell the house. Let's find the best place for the spouse that's not sick, and also for the spouse that is sick. And so which communities where we live are helpful to that. I hope that was helpful. If not, you can feel free to ask any follow-up questions. I know I gave a long answer to that. You know, for me, when we think about like where we are with this, I do call this the third question. And, you know, for many years, I always said to people that, you know, I basically spend my days answering two questions. The first question is, what happens if you die? Who gets your stuff? How do we get it to go to the next generation in the simplest, most tax advantage manner possible, right? So how do we do that? And so all of us on here, we do that during the days. We talk to people about what happens if they die. And then the second question, again, which we've all done for many years, if you're older like I am, what happens if you don't die, but you get sick and need long-term care? What do we have to do today to protect our assets? And, you know, that answer has changed over the years. Certainly, we still do quite a bit of Medicaid planning. We help people in a crisis with that. We've also expanded to talk about what type of, you know, guaranteed issue products. Should people be doing, you know, hybrid long-term care? I do a lot of teaching across the country about creative financial solutions, and so thinking about that. But the third question, which is really what today's about, is what happens if you don't just get sick, but you or your loved one gets Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia? What do we need to do today to make sure that that journey is easier? Because what we know is that the journey is really hard in this country. And what we know is that many caregivers are really suffering, and they need a trusted guide. They need somebody that can help them decide what this journey looks like and where we're going and how to be helpful to them. And so what I think is that, you know, all of our offices, certainly my office, has seen immense growth by meeting this need that's out there. That, you know, we can argue that the healthcare in this country should be able to meet this need. We could argue that I shouldn't have to be pushing for a better diagnosis, but the reality is we do. And I think elder law and estate planning attorneys are best situated to be impactful to their clients immediately, while we think about the policy in this country and, you know, figure out some other things. But if you think about it, I'd ask everybody here, like, how many clients did you see last week or last month that have Alzheimer's and dementia? And then really think about, you know, are they kind of lost out there? You know, if you've done the wills and powers of attorneys, and please know that's a valid thing, is there more that we could do for them? Statistically, 50% of your clients will have a diagnosis or do. I see at my office, the number one reason people come back to us to update their estate plan is because they have a new diagnosis. They don't always tell us that unless we ask. So when I do a review appointment, I ask people, are you having any memory problems? And sometimes they'll say to me, yeah, that's why they're here. I don't ask them if they have dementia or Alzheimer's, because that's a harder question for people to admit to. I also think it's really important that we understand. So if I see 4 clients on a Monday, which is often what I do. On a Monday, I often see 4 clients. Then I know that statistically, 2 out of 4 of them are going to end up or already have Alzheimer's dementia. My question there is, am I doing enough for them as an attorney? And then the second thing I know is, of them, 50% of people who have a diagnosis of dementia will be financially exploited. So am I doing enough to stop that? And I know it's hard. Listen, I have the same 24 hours you do every day. I know it's hard to do all of this. But I think it's really important that we think about how we're doing this, and whether you do it within your own office or you develop a network around you in your own community that you can make good referrals is totally up to you. But I think your focus should be, their security. So it's funny, years ago, I can remember people coming into my office, the late 1990s, early 2000s, and people would be like, I'm not going into a nursing home, right? And we have to understand that was a different generation of people. Their parents didn't go into a nursing home. They got sick and passed away. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't at all, but it wasn't as common. But today we have people sitting in front of us that they have had a loved one, a parent, a sibling that has, gotten a diagnosis and had to spend time in a nursing home. We also know that the typical baby boomer, which that first baby boomer is going to turn 80, January 1st of 2026. So 15 years ago, the first one turned 65. That person's a little different than that person that was sitting across from me from the table years ago. Baby boomers want to be prepared. They want a plan. They don't want to just let this disease happen to them, and they do not want to burden their children. So they want to really think this through. And obviously I'm being very generic when I say that, but what I would say to you is that I don't know if I could have done this with the client sitting across from me 25 years ago, but the people today really do. They're not, the baby boom generation has changed what it means to be every stage of life. And I think they're changing this, and they're saying that they want more. They're not going to just let this happen to them. They want a plan, and they want to know that they've done everything that they can. And I think that's really important. And so I think that really translates into us being able to offer this service. The other thing that has happened, and I alluded to this before, but the taboo about talking about this has been removed. I remember earlier in my career, people would come home for Thanksgiving, and everything was fine. And then one of their parents would pass away, and they're like, we didn't even know dad was that bad, because they came home for Thanksgiving and mom and dad made everything perfect, right? And that's because it was kind of taboo to talk about Alzheimer's or dementia. But we owe it to, again, Nancy Reagan. Seth Rogen is a huge person who is really coming out today and testifying in front of Congress and talking about, just how difficult this is. And so I think that's also helped people who now have a diagnosis or worry about it to be more proactive in their approach rather than just letting it happen to them or pretending that it's not. That gives an opportunity to us as planners to be able to provide a service to those people then. So, my thought to you is, become the experts for your client. Before I was an elder law attorney, I did litigation, and I remember you had to be the expert about whatever you were litigating about. I remember a case I had where, it was about a pool. I became an expert about everything about that pool, and I knew more about fences around pools and, what types of locks were the most appropriate. So if we're serving people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, I think it's time for us to become experts in this. I personally think it's an obligation for us to share our time and talents in a way that would help and benefit individuals affected by Alzheimer's or dementia, and to help caregivers have that peace of mind. Now, all of us can do this in a different way. I'm certainly not saying that we all have to do it at once. We could just become a little bit more understanding about the disease. And, I talked about the financial exploitation. So for me, that makes me sometimes lean a little bit more towards a trust than just relying on a power of attorney. I don't do it all the time, but sometimes I'll do a revocable living trust, particularly if the power of attorney is not a family member, maybe a longstanding friend, so that they are able to do that. Or if we're worried about somebody getting a diagnosis and then being financially exploited, we know statistically a trust is harder to change. It's more likely not to be exploited than just a power of attorney. So again, I'm not saying in any way that you have to do all the services that I do, although I do think it is a great business model. I do think it's a win-win. We are able to provide the service to our clients in a way that they wanted. It's made my firm grow very much, and unfortunately, it's a service that they're really not getting anyplace else. Now, there are changes out there. There's a new guide program under Medicare that's really helping. But I think the dementia-focused practice can mean something slightly different to different people, but I do think it's really, really important. So you could have a decision for 2026 to really focus a little bit more on dementia, and that benefits your clients and your community. And you want it to make sure that we just go beyond just giving the basic legal needs to people who are telling us that they have a diagnosis, because we know the Medicaid rules, like, right? So why are we waiting until they're, at that point in time? Do we know if they're going to make it 5 years? I don't know. So it's really something that we want to, embrace this dementia focus. It does start with the legal documents. Now, I would say to you, even my legal documents might be a little bit different. So in our documents, for instance, in my living will, we have much more information about what happens if I get dementia. And, I don't want to be artificially kept alive. I'm currently working with Interactive Legal on a dementia care directive that would be an addition. That really kind of talks about, do I want to voluntarily stop eating and drinking? So if I have dementia and I'm unable to recognize my family members, is there a set of things that I want at that point in time? And is that different, than when I first get the diagnosis? It's really kind of talking through those things. They're hard things to talk through, but it is something that we want to be talking through. And so it starts with documents, but I would say to you, my documents that I use probably have a little bit more dementia specific language in them, but it's also beyond that. If what I've talked about today is something that you want more information about, I suggest you go to dementiafocusedpractice.com. And there on that site, you can get a copy of my book, Help More People and Make More Money, that goes more in detail about becoming a dementia-focused practice. It's also something that I'd be happy to talk with you about, and kind of figure out where your personal practice is and how your situation could fit into this, because it's always a little bit different. It's not a one size fits all. It can be different depending if you're urban or rural. It can be different based on what your background is as an attorney. Again, some people might outsource some of this or engage contractors to do it. Some people bring it in-house and develop that there at their office. So everybody's, it can be a little bit different. And we'll now open it up for any questions people had. I did answer the questions as I could throughout, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And I can talk a little bit about like kind of the next iteration of this. Amber, I thought I saw a question, but when I came, it doesn't come up. The other ones did.
It looks like somebody raised their hand, but a question has not been typed into the question bar yet. So.
And do we want to let the person who raised their hand talk, or?
I don't believe I can unmute anybody. So if whoever had the question could just type it into the.
Great. Yeah, it looks like Melissa. I see that. Okay. Yeah, if you want to type your question, I'd be happy to answer it. The thing I would say to people that, kind of the next iteration of this at our office is really helping people, earlier in it, to the point that we now use what we call a caregiver's trust. that allows, really information to be given to the caregiver about how they want to be cared for. Do they want to be cared for at home? Do they want to go to a facility? And it's interesting. You think, most people just want X. That's not necessarily true. I find that people have ideas about it. I was just meeting with a client before I came in here, and we were actually talking about that. And in their circumstance, they absolutely do not want their family members to take care of them, and they absolutely want to go into a facility. And they're choosing to put a caregiver's trust together so that the money is available to pay for that, and so that they feel comfortable doing that. And so I think that's important for people to talk about. So repeating the website, yep, it's dementiafocusedpractice.com, where you can get a free copy of the book. And so, anything, and on the dementiafocusedpractice.com website, if you have any other questions, I would do a download to the book. They can either mail it to you or it's a digital download, which just kind of goes more in depth about this. So I think it's a great place for people to start. And we also can give you other resources if it's something you're really interested about. And Cheryl's asking, is the caregiver's trust financially focused or care both focused? It's actually both. It's actually both. So really kind of combining really interesting financial products, some that are guaranteed issues, some that are more pre-planning with the use of a trust. A little bit for some of it, it can be provided with Medicaid planning. Some of it is not Medicaid planning, it's not impoverishment, it's more empowerment planning. But we definitely want to be thinking about that. And there's no right or wrong, it depends on people's ages and how much money they have. We find this type of marketing, dementia marketing and Parkinson's marketing, gets us many affluent clients that have quite a bit of money. I didn't develop the caregiver's trust myself, and that is something that if you want more information about, I can definitely get you that information. And I'm just trying to think about the best way to do that. Just reaching out to my email. Send me an email and I can give you more information about that. We actually have an event coming up about the caregiver's trust so that people can kind of understand how to use that, which can be dementia specific, but isn't always, is what I would say to you. Many of the people that we do the caregiver's trust for have a new diagnosis, but some do not.
Julie, you had mentioned another website too, the planningandprotecting.com. Is that another one that attorneys should be looking for? I'm not sure if that's what Chad was referring to or the other one.
Oh. Yeah, so the Planning and Protecting website, I'm sorry, there's so many different things going on here. So the Dementia Focused Practice is really for you as a practitioner, where we're talking about how do you have a dementia focused practice, and we have resources on there for you. The Planning and, with and spelled out, protecting.com site is a site that I have as part of my coaching group. But right now it's really interesting, Amber. We are, because of my podcast that I'm doing with my daughter, which is having great success, we're often on that podcast saying, you need to talk to an attorney, you need to talk to an attorney. And like, I only practice in Pennsylvania, so I can't help them. And so we've started sending them to the Planning and Protecting website. And that's a website where you can get information about the podcast and our caregiver toolkit. And you can do a free download there. And honestly, on that website, we're often looking for attorneys in different areas that we don't already have members to be sending some of those referrals that are just kind of naturally happening. We did the Pay Woman podcast really as a passion project, just to help people. And it's putting off referrals that we then feel like, okay, we need to have people in different places. And so the planning and protecting site is a site that is really more for people who are looking for, clients of ours that are looking. But the thing that's really important on that website is the caregiver toolkit. And the reason I point that out to you is we have law offices across the nation using that caregiver toolkit to implement the dementia focused practice. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know how to do all of this, we could start with the caregiver toolkit, and it's just something that your staff can go through. So there's a thing about planning a funeral, there are things about planning care, those types of things. So it gives you a more systematic way to deal with it with your clients, and something that's tangible, which what we found is for some law offices, that's a great way to go. Not every, you certainly don't have to do it, but that's also a free download if you want to look into more of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Any other questions? Oh, I see another one. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the nice comments. I'm sorry that for some of it, there was some pauses as my computer's having some issues right now. So Amber was moving the slides for me. So I appreciate everybody's patience with that. So yeah, happy. This is definitely, I appreciate Amber having me on, because this is definitely something that's really near and dear to my heart. I'm definitely really on a mission to help make the journey better across this nation for those people who have a loved one who has dementia. And I actually think elder law and estate planning attorneys are the people who are best situated to make the most impact the quickest. And so we can't change our healthcare system, we can't change our policies, but we can educate, empower, and be that trusted guide to these families and really, really make it better for them.
Thank you, Julie. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge today. So thank you everybody else for joining us, and I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. Take care.